There you go.
Thank
Oh,
you.
okay. Alrighty. So the way transition is going to go for our kiddos. So from age 27 months to 33 months, we are going to have a transition planning conference, and that will be held with the early intervention services, which could be the regional center and the school district, 90 days prior to our third birthday. The referral will be sent to the school district by that early intervention service agency, which again could be ALTA, to the school district to initiate that special education assessment. And then by the third birthday, the IEP conference must be held. And then underneath you'll find, and kind of sprinkled throughout, you'll see some educational codes just to kind of help guide and let you know like, hey, this is what this particular code is and what we're referencing there. So we'll dive a little further into that transition planning conference. So again, this is going to take place between 27 to 33 months. Typically, we would see it happen around 31 to 33 months, but it can occur earlier. Some participants that would be a part of this would, of course, be parents, guardians, anyone that you guys decide to add into that meeting or you would like to come to support you at that meeting. And then it could also be representative from that early start agency and the district. And then in that meeting, we're going to be discussing a couple of things. The first will be, what are the next steps for kiddo? So does that look like preschool? And then when we're talking about preschool, is it going to be a private preschool? Is it going to be public preschool? Are we going to be doing special education, childcare? Are we going to be home with parents, etc.? And the second one that we'll be discussing is really what is the process for special education. So the school district will explain what that's going to look like, and they will present assessment plans in order to initiate and start that process for kiddo. And then just so everybody knows, you don't have to have your kiddo assessed. You don't have to put them in preschool right away. Some parents choose to keep them home, and that is a-okay. So we just want to let you all know that school is not compulsory until age 6. Oops, sorry, my mouse doesn't want to work. There we go.
Okay, so how will services change? So this is a comparison between early intervention and special education services. When children transition from early start through the regional center to special education in their school district, they may or may not receive those same services. And some of the changes that may include the focus of services, the location of services, and then the frequency and duration of services. So in the focus of services, I'll start with early intervention services. Those are developmentally based. So based on their areas of development, such as physical, which is reaching, rolling, crawling, walking, cognitive, in areas of thinking, learning, and solving problems, communication, talking, listening, and understanding, and then social emotional, playing, feeling secure and happy, and self-help, such as eating, dressing, and taking care of those individual needs. Those are all based on developmental age. And then on the right-hand side are special education services, which are educationally based. So those programs and services that are provided by the school district are provided to give student access to their educational program. And when they are making those recommendations in that offer, they are considering what the educational benefit of those services and or programs are. So for location of services and frequency and duration, on the left is early intervention services. Those are typically the individual services. They're provided in the natural environment, such as the home. They can meet in the playground or in the child's daycare. They can receive those services 1 to 2 times weekly. And of course, in that natural environment, the parent, guardians, and caregivers are present during those sessions. On the right side, special education services. Those services can be individual and or group services. So they can have a one-on-one type of situation for a service, and also they can be in a small group or a larger group. They are typically provided in the classroom or other school-based location. They're provided 1 to 5 times weekly, or they can also be like a consultative model that is done monthly. Typically, the 5 times a week involves that academic program if they're in a self-contained classroom or they need more academic support. And sometimes the speech and language or occupational therapy can be that 1 time weekly, and that's all within the school environment. Parents and guardians and caregivers are not present at those sessions because it's on the school grounds and during the school day.
All right, so next we're going to talk about what regional center services are going to look like after age 3. So the first piece of eligibility for regional center services is a diagnosis. So our clients do need to have a diagnosis of one of these 5 categories or more: intellectual disability, cerebral palsy, epilepsy, autism, or a 5th category, which would necessitate services and supports closely resembling an intellectual disability. The next areas for eligibility, the client would need to have a disability prior to age 18. The disability is expected to be lifelong and would have some substantial limitations in 3 or more of the following categories. So those are self-care, learning, mobility, expressive and receptive language, self-direction, capacity for independent living, and economic self-sufficiency. We also have another category called provisional eligibility. So these are for our littles, age 3 to 4, who may not necessarily qualify under those 5 categories at this time. But we're still seeing that, hey, there's a need. They may need those early intervention services. And again, the disability can't be solely physical in nature. It must present significant limitations in at least 2 of the following areas, which are very similar to the others. But they are, again, self-care, self-direction, expressive receptive language, mobility, and learning. And then finally, at age 5, that's where the regional center will go back in and reevaluate to see if they would meet one of those 5 categories for eligibility. And then once all of that has been established, after age 3, kiddos who continue to be clients will be transferred from that early start unit over to a children's unit. So you will get a new service coordinator. We can do a transfer meeting to assist with that and to allow you some time to meet with your new service coordinator and ask questions.
Special education eligibility. So for special education eligibility, as Tara did state, that the regional center has a diagnosis of one of those 5 areas. For special education eligibility, they have different criteria to determine whether a student meets eligibility. And that criteria is under the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act and also California Education Code in 1 or more of the following areas. So on the right, we have 13 categories: autism, deaf blindness, deafness, emotional disability, hearing impairment, intellectual disability, multiple disabilities, orthopedic impairment, other health impairment, specific learning disability, speech or language impairment, traumatic brain injury, and visual impairment. And also notice on this asterisk, established medical disability, ages 3 to 5, I'll be covering that in the next slide. So in order to meet eligibility, you have to meet 1 or more of those following areas, as well as have that disability that negatively affects the educational performance to a marked degree, as well as that disability that has been identified. In order for that student to access their educational program, they require special education and or related services. So they have to have all 3 of those to meet that special education eligibility piece. Note that the students do not need a medical diagnosis in order to qualify for special education. They only have to have a suspected area of disability, and then that will be assessed in those areas to determine if they do meet that education eligibility piece. Okay. And then for established medical disability, this is under California Education Code, which is a disabling medical condition or congenital syndrome that the IEP team determines has a high predictability of requiring special education services. Students will be assessed at age 5 to determine eligibility under IDEA and California Education Code. So if you look at kind of a comparison, it's different, but it's kind of like our provisional eligibility, where they are at risk for potentially needing special education services, but it can't be determined at that time what of the 13 categories if they qualify under those. So that's 3 and 4, and at age 5 they're reassessed to determine if they do meet eligibility criteria under one or more of those 13 categories. Again, it has to be a disabling medical condition or congenital syndrome, and these difficulties are unrelated to a student who is an English language learner, has a temporary physical disability, any social maladjustment, any environmental factors, cultural factors, or other economic factors. And also they have to determine that their needs cannot be met with the regular accommodations or modifications and any support at home, school, or both environments, and they require additional resources in order to receive educational benefit.
With all that, now we're going to dive into what is special education.
So Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, or IDEA, and that is the federal law that mandates districts provide a free, appropriate public education, or FAPE. You'll hear more about that in subsequent slides, to all children with eligible children with disabilities. So IDEA itself has 4 parts, but for today's purposes, we'll be focusing on B and C, which are circled. For it's called Part C of IDEA, and that's the 0 to 36 months, what we're referring to as early start, children who receive those early intervention services under infants and toddlers with disabilities, and that would be called IDEA Part C. Once the child turns 3 years old, that's when they go into IDEA Part B, which is Assistance for All Children with Disabilities, and that's that district piece where they determine whether they're eligible for an IEP in special education. The federal law covers children ages 3 to 21, and that's where they receive those special education and related services. In California, under California Education Code, we cover students all the way through age 22. So IDEA is mandated to provide those services through age 21. So if a family moves to another state, they may not extend those services until age 22, because that is specifically under California Education Code. So it's different. Otherwise, if we just followed that federal mandate, then they would exit at 21. Okay, and the 6 main, let me see 1 second. Okay, so the 6 main principles of IDEA are free, appropriate public education, or FAPE, least restrictive environment, or LRE, appropriate evaluation assessment to establish eligibility and guide services, individualized education plan or program, or IEP, procedural safeguards, and then parent-student participation in the decision process. And each subsequent slides will cover all 6 of those areas.
All right, so our first area under IDEA is FAPE. So what is FAPE? So FAPE stands for Free, Appropriate Public Education. So when we say free, that means public schools are obligated to provide special education services at no cost to families. Appropriate. The services will be designed to meet the unique needs of the children with disabilities based on appropriate evaluation and placement options. Public, so public schools must make special education services available to all students who live within their boundaries. And education, students will be provided with appropriately challenging education in line with their IEP. Our next area is what is least restrictive environment, or LRE. So what this means is, to the maximum extent that is appropriate to that child, we are placing them with their typically developing peers. So ideally, we always want them to be as close to general education as possible, but also as is appropriate to the student. The second area is special classes. Separate schools or removal from students with disabilities from a general education class can only occur when the nature or severity of the disability would hinder the student from accessing their learning or their learning environment.
So I'll move into the evaluation process, starting with the transition planning conference. And the transition planning conference, it serves as a warm handoff from the regional center to the school districts. So at that transition planning conference, or TPC, the regional center and the school district representatives will be present with the parent. And in that TPC meeting, the district representative will explain the process for assessments to the parent, and explain in terms of how they're going to be assessed, the timeline, and the IEP meeting, and what the parent can expect. So in number 2, for the signed consent for assessments, the parent needs to provide written consent in order for the school district to be the assessors of that student. And on the assessment plan, it will include the areas that will be assessed and also the title of that assessor. So if it's speech and language, it'll say SLP, or speech language pathologist. Some assessment plans also have the name of the assessor, but not always. But at the least, they do have the area of assessment as well as the title of the assessor. And then the IEP must be completed by the student's 3rd birthday. Keep in mind, parents, if their child has received those early intervention services and it's recommended that they be assessed in the school district, they do not have to have their child assessed for special education services if they're not comfortable having them at that time. But also, if they decide that they do want them assessed at a later date, then they are always able to ask in writing for those assessments if they decide later down the road that they do want their child assessed. So for assessment evaluation, the assessments that the district conducts, they determine if the student is eligible for special education, and if so, if goals, services, and/or programs are needed. Remember those 3 parts that I said in terms of needing to be present in order to qualify for special education. And also, the child must be assessed in all areas of suspected disability. They don't need to have any diagnosis to be assessed in that area, since they do follow different criteria for eligibility. One recommendation that we have is at the beginning of that assessment period, prior to them assessing, to request some copies of the report to review prior to the IEP meeting. We've noticed that it does lessen that anxiety in terms of what to expect, because at those initial IEP meetings, there can be a lot of information to process. And so a lot of times, if you have those reports prior to the IEP meeting, then it makes it a little bit more smooth in terms of understanding that process and the information that will be shared in that initial IEP meeting. If the parent does not agree with some of the assessments that the team has conducted, they have the right to request an independent education evaluation, or IEE, at the public's expense. So that would be at the expense of the school district. The parents are entitled to 1 IEE per assessment conducted. For example, if a parent does not agree with the psychoeducational evaluation done by the school psychologist, the speech pathologist and occupational therapist, they're entitled to one IEE per area. So three total in each area. And they need to be requested within 2 years of that initial assessment. And the district has the option to either fund the IEE or file due process to defend their assessment. They're not able to deny a request without filing due process. So if they do not, if they deny that request for an IEE, but don't follow up with a due process in order to defend their assessment, then that would be considered out of compliance. And the timeline for assessments, for today's purposes, we're referring to the referral from Early Start, but it also applies to any time a parent or school district makes a referral or puts in writing for a referral for an assessment. Within 15 days, the district has to provide the parent with an assessment plan or a prior written notice, or PWN, which outlines the reason for denial. So once that referral is made, they have two options: either to provide that parent the assessment plan to sign, or to provide a prior written notice and given the reasons that they're being denied for those referrals. And that's 15 days. And then once the parent has that, they have about 15 calendar days to review the assessment plan and then sign it and return it to the team. Assessments are completed and the initial IEP is held within 16 calendar days upon receipt of that signed assessment plan. With one exception is that timelines do pause if there is a school break more than 5 days. So this is mainly applicable with year-round schools. So if the students are off for a month, then that timeline would pause, or winter break as well as summer break. And then after that, the assessments are completed and the IEP is held, then the parent does have time to review that and consent to the district's offer of free appropriate public education. Keep in mind that the IEP cannot be implemented until that parent provides written consent.
So the next area we're going to discuss are the components of the IEP document. So first, what will be discussed? It's going to be a lot. The first meeting is always a lot. There's a lot of assessments to review. There's the entire IEP. So typically what we see at the beginning is the service providers are going to review their assessment. So that'll be the first thing we discuss. The second area will be present levels of performance. That will be followed by eligibility. And eligibility and present levels could be flip-flopped. It could go either way. I've seen school psychologists discuss their assessments, and then right underneath that, that's where we talk about eligibility. And then we dive into those present levels of performance. After that, we will discuss goals, the offer of FAPE, or again, that free appropriate public education, any special factors, state assessments, and educational setting. And again, these can be flipped around depending. Every district kind of has their own layout of how they like to present things, and it could even vary from like teacher to teacher. So present levels of performance. So this is the area that is essentially going to capture who your kiddo is, what are their strengths, what are the concerns for their learning, and then where are they with their learning. So we'll discuss strengths, concerns, pre-academic and functional skills. So where are we at in terms of reading, in terms of knowing our letters, in terms of math, so corresponding numbers to like physical objects, things of that nature. Communication development, gross fine motor skills, social, emotional, behavioral, adaptive daily living, and health. So it should create a very clear picture of who your kiddo is, how they're learning, what are the areas of concern, what are their strengths. We want it to, again, just really paint a good picture of who the student is. So that way, once the teacher picks that up, they read through it, they know, oh, okay, so-and-so needs assistance here, needs this there. So it should just create a very clear picture of the student.
Okay, next we'll move into special education eligibility. And again, this is where the assessors review their reports and answer any questions. Each assessor will determine whether they are eligible for that particular service. And the school psychologists, they are the ones who determine eligibility under one of those 13 categories. So again, for eligibility, once it's determined, it's different than a diagnosed disability. Not to say that if someone, for example, has a diagnosis of autism, that they won't have a eligibility of autism, but it's not always aligned. So we have some clients who are diagnosed with autism, but maybe don't meet educational criteria for autism, and maybe they meet criteria under speech or language impairment. So it does differ because they do have different criteria that they use to determine eligibility. The team can document on the IEP up to 2 categories to qualify a student for special education. That's not to say that maybe a student qualifies under 3, but the IEP document does give the option of 2, which one is a primary disability, and that is the category that is indicative of a student's needs and has the primary impact that affects the student's access to their educational program. And then the secondary one is just additional category that also represents the student's needs. Disability does not drive services or placement. So the disability is just one of the factors that determines eligibility for special education. And then moving into the assessment results, where the areas of strength, the areas of weakness, as well as those present levels of performance. So snapshot of where is that student or that child performing at that given time. And then that's where those goals are developed in the child's area of need. And so those goals are what drive the services and placement. And basically, the team will determine, given the goals that were developed, what services or placement is needed in order for the student to meet those goals. So disability is just one piece. I'll give you an example. If we have one student who has autism and they have more significant needs, maybe they are nonverbal, they need a more smaller learning environment, they may have goals that require a self-contained classroom and extra speech and language therapy, occupational therapy. And then we can have another student of the same age with under the autism category, but maybe they just need some social pragmatics and speech and language. And then their goals would be developed under the area of communication. So they would recommend speech and language therapy in order to address those goals. So again, disability does not drive placement, the goals drive services and placement.
Which is a great segue into goals and faith. So goals. So again, those are going to address those areas of concern or deficit that we'll see throughout those present levels of performance. So again, present levels should really give us a clear picture of what kiddo can do and what they have the opportunity to work on, and from those assessments. Goals, again, do drive services. From those goals, we'll know what services the student will need in order to make progress to achieve those goals. When we talk about goals, we always talk about the acronym SMART. So SMART stands for specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and time-bound. So we want all of our goals to have these components. We want a specific area that we are talking about. So we'll say reading can be our specific area. Measurable, okay, well, what specifically are we looking at in terms of measuring? So let's say it could be reading comprehension, which I know would be a little bit higher than our 3-year-olds. But if we're looking at reading comprehension, how are we going to measure that? Is that going to be through work samples? How many trials is the student going to be given? The next area, is it achievable? So we should have, when we start, a baseline. So the baseline is going to give us that percentage of where our foundation piece is. So going back to reading comprehension, let's say we are reading at grade level and understanding and able to answer questions at 20% accuracy. So we would write a goal to try to help bridge that gap. So we could realistically say within a year's time, all goals will be 1 year. in a goal's time, or I'm sorry, a year's time, that goal could be around 60%, 80%. And so we would go from that baseline of 20% up to 80%, which could be doable. If we're starting at 0%, we may not be able to get to that 80%. It may be more challenging depending on the student. So we want it to be achievable. And then under that, we want it to be relevant. So again, it should relate to the things that we are seeing in the assessments, in our present levels. It shouldn't be something that's way out of left field that we're, okay, well, why is this connected to the student? We should never question that piece. And then time bound. Again, like I mentioned, goals are always set 1 year out from that IEP date. So we will have 1 full year to work on those goals and make progress. And then from those goals, we are going to get our offer of FAPE, or free appropriate public education. So this is going to discuss what classroom environment the student is going to need, any related services that may benefit them, such as like speech and language or occupational therapy, anything that would be necessary to help them to access their learning.
And next, we'll move into the special factors portion of the IEP document. And that includes assistive technology devices and services such as that AAC device, or augmentative and alternative communication device. It also includes low incident services, which include students who are deaf or hard of hearing, deaf and blind, orthopedically impaired equipment needs. Also considerations if the student is blind or visually impaired, and what do they require in terms of those services and accommodations. Considerations if the student is deaf or hard of hearing. English learner and how the student will receive primary language support, as well as behavior considerations and how the behavior impedes their learning will be addressed either through behavior goals or a behavior intervention plan.
The next area that will be discussed are statewide assessments. So for our littles, it'll be from 3 to 5. They will be given the Desired Results Developmental Profile, or DRDP. And this is an assessment that is given in the natural environment to assess how they are progressing. Once they get a little bit older, we're going to be looking at CASP testing and science. I'm sorry, CASP is that English language arts or math testing, science and PE. Then for our English language learners, they will also be assessed in the English Language Proficiency Assessment in California, or LPAC. So this is to determine how proficient we are with English as a second language. So that will be given after kindergarten.
And the next portion of the IEP is educational setting. And then most of the contents of this, the IEP will not be applicable until transition kindergarten and kindergarten. A lot of it will determine percentage in general education, percentage outside of general education, which is more applicable once they get into that transition or kindergarten. But the following items are applicable, which is district of service. So where does the child reside? The preschool program setting, any regular early childhood program hours, the effective start date, other agency services. That's where they do have an option to mark Alta California Regional Center. And then also how often and how the parents will be informed of progress on those goals that Tara reviewed.
Related services are any service that is necessary to help the student to benefit from their special education program. Students do need to be assessed for any type of related services prior to being given that service. And again, very similar to medical diagnoses and eligibility under educational code, medical criteria differs greatly from educational criteria in terms of the related services. When we're looking at related services in school, the service providers are looking at how they can help the student to access their learning and or learning environment. So things that would reside outside of that would fall more to a medical related service rather than the educational related service. Here are a few common examples we see of related services. This is not a full exhaustive list of related services, but these are common ones that we encounter in our travels in talking to our families. Speech and language, orientation and mobility, behavior services, adapted physical education. I keep wanting to say APE. I want to say the acronyms all the time. Physical therapy, occupational therapy, and educationally related mental health services. So again, this is not an exhaustive list of all the related services. These are just some common ones that we encounter.
So we're going to move into the initial IEP meeting and what can we expect? So the IEP team, there will be, of course, parents or guardians, the general education teacher, if the child may be in a general education environment, and a special education teacher or service provider, a school district representative, such as the administrator at that school, a designee, an administrative designee, or there can also be a program specialist from the special ed department, the assessors, or an individual who can interpret those assessment results. So if the person who did assess your child cannot be present, they need to have someone who is able to interpret those assessment results so that the parent understands what assessments were given. Also, other individuals with knowledge of the student, this is the perfect opportunity to invite your child's service coordinator to that IEP meeting to provide support. And then, of course, the student when it's appropriate. We typically recommend for students to start attending IEP meetings in middle school, where they can start becoming more of a participant in their learning and their programs.
So support in the IEP meeting, we always suggest to bring someone with you in the meeting. The IEP meetings can be very emotional. There's a lot of information. A lot is happening in those meetings. And at times it can feel like you, like the parent against a full team of individuals who are saying, this is what the student needs. This is who the student is. So we always like to suggest taking a support person to kind of help. That person can be there to support you, help you to ask the questions that maybe are difficult to ask at that particular time. And or really, again, just be there to support you. You can request to record meetings in order to help you to review afterwards, or if there are concerns with contentious meetings where maybe we're kind of butting heads, we're not in agreement. There's some things that, we're not in alignment. For whatever reason, the team is on different wavelengths. You do have the right to request to record the meeting. In order to do this, you must give the district 24-hour notice. If you don't give it within 24-hour notice, they can deny the request. Otherwise, they can't deny the request. They would need to honor that. So in doing that, the parent will need to have their own device to record, and then the district will also have their own device to record.
So at the IEP meeting, everything has been determined, discussed, and documented, and the offer has been made. But if you don't feel comfortable at that moment because of all the information, you do not need to sign the IEP until you have considered it. And until you feel comfortable, all your questions have been answered. Of course, if there's something that is confusing or you don't understand, please feel free to ask questions. This is the meeting where you do ask questions for clarity. If you ask for a service or accommodation or anything and the district denies that request, then you are, of course, entitled to ask that clarity question, clarifying question, and also that it be documented in the notes for future reference. So if you have a conversation in that notes page of the IEP, it's basically a narrative of everything that has been discussed during that IEP meeting. So if there is a request that the district says no to, then their reason should also be documented in that notes. And of course, if they don't provide a reason, then please feel free to ask for a reason. And one of the reasons that they can say in terms of additional speech therapy is that they don't have enough data to support that request. So maybe in the notes page, Based on that request for additional speech therapy, the speech therapist says that he or she will go back and do some informal assessments to determine if they may benefit from additional speech therapy sessions. So that all should be documented in that note section of the IEP.
So diving into parent consent. So at the IEP meeting, attendees will need to sign that they were there. So participation is different than consent. It'll just be, okay, everybody who is a part of the meeting, if it is in person, they will pass around a piece of paper that basically is just you are a participant. You can agree to all or some parts of the IEP. So if the IEP presented, we feel it meets the needs, there's no questions, there aren't really any concerns, you can agree to the IEP in its total, the whole thing. If there are certain areas that are in disagreement, so again, maybe kind of using speech, maybe the student is only qualifying for 20 minutes of speech a month. That could be an area of disagreement if we feel that maybe there is a greater need there and maybe we need more data to support that. So in signing with this agreement, it's a specific portion on the IEP. So there is a part that says, I agree to all parts. And there's another one, I agree to all parts except. And then with that exception, that's where you can sign specifically with what you disagree with. If it is a long list of disagreement, you may want to attach an additional piece of paper to be able to lay out what those disagreements are. So the other portion, only components that are agreed upon in the IEP can be implemented. So if we are, let's say, in agreement to occupational therapy and the special day class, which would be under specialized academic instruction, and you sign an agreement to those can be implemented. If we do not agree with the speech portion and we are asking for further data or more assessments, that portion cannot be implemented until the team has come to an agreement, until parents have signed. You do not need to sign consent at the meeting. I always suggest to parents to request the documents, take them home, review them, kind of like Christine was saying. You want to review the entire document, spend some time with it. Those meetings, again, can be very emotional. There's a lot going on. There's a lot of information coming at you. So it's very helpful to be able to take home the document and review. Special education programs, again, and services can't start until there has been consent on the IEP. That's very important. I just want to drive that one home.
And next we'll move into procedural safeguards, also called parents' rights. Procedural safeguards must be provided to you when you request a copy, the first time your child is referred for a special education assessment, each time you are given an assessment plan to evaluate your child, upon the receipt or due process complaint to a school, and then when the decision is made to make a removal that constitutes a change of placement. Typically, even in addition to those 5 points, it's best practice that you'll notice that at any meeting, whether it's an addendum or amendment meeting, a yearly meeting, or the plan review meeting, they will offer you those procedural safeguards. We recommend that you get to know very well what your rights are, because a lot of the questions on procedures and rights and requesting certain things, making complaints, those are all listed in your procedural safeguards. So I'll start with the procedural safeguard points, and parents, students, and for students, that's for the students over 18. They have the right to participate in the IEP process. You are a participating team member. The right to receive prior written notice, also known as PWN, if the district refuses or proposes a change to requests or services and programs on the IEP. You have the right to consent or refuse consent for an assessment and or services. You have the right to a non-discriminatory assessment of the student, the right to independent education evaluation or IEE if there is a disagreement with the assessment results, and also a right to have access to your child's educational records. Procedural safeguards will continue. The parents have the right to stay in the current program if there is a disagreement about that placement, to be given a hearing regarding disagreements about an IEP, the right to receive mediation, the right to file a complaint against your school district, either with the school district or also there's an option to make a complaint against for California Department of Education or CDE. There's a uniform complaint. To be informed of school discipline and or alternative placement, and then also to be informed of policies regarding children who attend private schools.
And here are a few questions that could be helpful in an IEP. My favorite thing in an IEP is to ask questions. I mean, how else do we get the answers, right? So I always like to think of the WH questions, who, what, when, where, why, how. So for instance, what service or intervention is being recommended? Why is it being recommended? What is the goal? What will it look like when being provided? Who will provide it? When will it be provided? Where, how will it be provided? And how will progress be monitored? So all of these are going into, again, like what is the data? Who is going to own this particular piece? And they're all very valid. And those are some great starter questions, especially again, like moving in to an IEP and going to the first IEP, there's a lot going on. So having an idea of some possible questions to ask ahead of time is helpful.
So here are some steps to prepare for that upcoming IEP meeting. Since during the present levels of performance portion of that IEP meeting, they will be asking parents for any strengths and concerns relating to their education. So writing these out will be helpful for you, so you don't have to think about it in the moment, since it can be overwhelming. It would be helpful to write all of that information down, so that when you are asked those questions, it's readily available, so you don't have to think about it on the spot. Also, to ask for copies of the reports prior to the IEP meeting. And this is so that you can review it before the meeting. And if you have any questions, you can contact the person who conducted that assessment for any type of clarification. If you have any questions about what something means, what assessments they provided, and then you'll be prepared once you get in that meeting, and everything won't be a surprise or a shock. Also, to plan to have someone join to support. And again, I'm going to keep saying this, that can be your child service coordinator. So let them know ahead of time when that meeting will be. Of course, you can have other family friends, any specialist that is familiar with your child who you'd like to attend, anyone who is familiar with your child or can provide support to you. Maybe have someone there so that you can be just an active listener and not have to worry about taking notes. You can have somebody join you, contact your service coordinator, so that you do feel supported in that process.
And the other thing we like to suggest to our families, it's very helpful to keep records. So having a binder or even a electronic file as we progress with our educational career might be a good idea to have the electronic file, because you can get a pretty big folder there. But we suggest keeping things like the assessments, evaluations, the IEPs themselves, report cards, progress summary reports. And again, those progress summary reports are connected to goals. They won't be connected necessarily to grades. Those will be to goals and how we are progressing towards meeting our goals. Staff communications, if there are, again, like maybe some disconnects in how we're communicating, and we need to keep record of how the school is communicating certain things. That's helpful. Any relevant medical reports, and any behavioral incident reports as well. All of that can be very helpful to just have on hand. So if we're moving schools, if we are with a new school team, new teacher, we have all of that. And then for IEP support, like we mentioned, our service coordinators can assist if given enough time. If you're not sure who your coordinator is, you can call our main line and ask for officer of the day and let them know you're trying to identify who your service coordinator is.
And then for the parent resource, I really like this resource. It includes a lot of helpful information. It's called the High Quality IEP Project, and it was created in the last couple years to help serve families and also the school districts across the state. And they provide trainings and resources to help in that IEP process. There's a link on the right hand side. And one thing that I do also that I really like is that they have checklists. They have parent checklists before the IEP meeting, during the IEP meeting, and after the IEP meeting. They have everything that you can expect, things that maybe you want to complete that you can check off. And also they have checklists on even the transition process from that IDEA Part C, so the early start into the special education. They have a checklist of everything that is going to happen in that process. So it's a really helpful website. It has videos on explaining the different processes. So it's really a well-rounded resource for parents and teachers and schools alike.
And that concludes our turning 3. I'm also going to put the PDF in the chat. We do have someone very thankfully put the link to that high quality IEP
Thank you.
website in there. Thank you. We appreciate that. I'm also going to pop the PDF in the chat again. So that way you have this slideshow that we presented today, that high quality. There's also the educational codes and all of that fun stuff as well. And then were there any questions?
Oh yeah, I see someone raised it.
Oh.
Olivia Alonso.
Hi, I'm Olivia Alonso, and I have a question. First of all, thank you guys for the presentation today. And
Of course.
so I would contact the school first that I want my son to go to, and then they would do, I mean, I'm sure I'm simplifying it, but the school district would have the school psychologist or an equivalent do an assessment, and then there would be an IEP meeting. Is that sound kind of like how?
Is your child right now in early start, or are they already past 3?
He's 2.5 almost.
Okay, and is he in early start here at the regional center?
Yes.
Okay, so that would go through that transition planning conference. You can contact your child's service coordinator in early start, and that would follow you. You don't actually have to be the one to request that. It's a natural transition if they determine that he would need that special education evaluation. So that is part of that process. The transitioning from the Part C or early start, the IDEA, to Part B. So that's in the process, which would be initiated by our regional center. So parents have to go and specifically request assessments at the school district if their child is already 3 or after 3. So
Okay.
because your child is in early start right now, that will be part of that process in terms of determining, does it look like he needs a referral to be assessed for special education? And if so, then you would have that transition planning conference with your service coordinator and the school district where you reside, and they'll determine next steps for you.
Okay, so start by talking to my service coordinator about the transition planning conference.
Right. Yeah,
Okay.
and that can happen between 27 and 33 months. Typically, what I hear from our early start units is that they're typically holding those TPC or transition planning conferences between 31 and 33 months. But you can have the TPC as early as 27 months or 9 months before your child turns 3.
Okay, he's 28 months, so I think I'd like to do it soon just to make sure he gets a spot in
Yeah,
school. Okay, thank you.
of course.
I have a question.
Yes.
Okay. My granddaughter, who I have under my care, she was, we did the IEP and everything, and they said they owed me 70 hours plus 5 hours of speech. They had me sign the paperwork, told me someone was going to be coming to my house, and that never happened. And school has started, so she started school. Will they still give me that 70 hours plus 5 in speech, or because she's in school, they're not going to do it? Because I mean, I waited and waited. I called and never got a response back.
Yeah. And this was an agreement on missed services?
Yes, I
Okay,
signed up. I had the IEP and everything, so they couldn't find a place for her doing last year. So they
okay,
said they owed me 70 hours and five
okay.
hours of speech.
Yeah, so it should be in the document in terms of, you know, the time span or the date within making up those missed sessions. So I would contact the special ed department to follow up on what those compensatory services are. Um, because if it's documented, then that's a legal document stating that your grandchild is supposed to receive those services. So I
Okay.
can't give legal advice, but I would recommend following up with your child's school district, specifically the special education department, not necessarily the school site, but the special education department.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Uh-huh.
And then I'm not fast enough typing. I was trying to get through. So the next question, my son's evaluation is scheduled during a holiday week. So he will have 3 days of assessment instead of 4. Is this a concern? I'm now worried he may not qualify for services due to lack of data. Should I reschedule to a 4-day assessment instead? So when we are assessing kiddos, they have a 60-day timeline. So once you sign the assessment plan that is given, that will say, hey, we are assessing for XYZ. So a psychological assessment will always be there, specialized academic assessment, speech, OT, whatever related services that we feel the student needs to be assessed in. The team has 60 days to conduct those assessments. Typically in delivering those standardized assessments, it can take anywhere from, I would say, 2 days up to a week, just for the standardized assessments. When we're looking at the 60-day timeline, we also want to see things like observations. And for the initial assessment data, the observations may come from those actual assessment times and dates, because the student may not be in, the child may not be in preschool yet. They may not be in an academic environment yet, so they can pull the observations from the assessments. If you feel that the assessment has been rushed and is not comprehensive and is not covering all areas of concern, that's where you can request that independent education evaluation to have your child reassessed at public expense. I don't necessarily see a concern with the 3-day timeline. It can be kind of tight depending, because every assessment, it's kiddo to kiddo. I've sat in assessments where we were able to do everything in one sitting. And then I've had assessments where it would take me a week or more, depending
Yeah.
on the student. So if you feel those 3 days are not enough, you can request to push it back in a time frame that will fit that 4-day model. Or potentially, again, you can go through the assessments, see what comes from that. If we get a comprehensive assessment out of that, and then if we feel that it is not comprehensive and does not cover all areas of concerns, and it isn't a reflection of your child, then that's where you can request that independent education evaluation.
And even before that, if you're feeling apprehensive about taking that 3 days of assessment instead of 4, you can ask that team what they recommend and what it looks like in a 3-day assessment period versus a 4-day, and whether they think, because they know what assessment areas will be covered and what assessments will be conducted. So I would recommend following up with that team to ask some clarifying questions, whether they feel like they would be able to complete all of those assessments with fidelity in that 3-day period. And then you can move on from there to determine whether you would feel more comfortable taking that 3 days based upon their response to you, whether you want to take that 3 days of assessment, or if you would prefer to reschedule for a 4-day. So I would definitely recommend starting with that team itself, or whoever your contact person is for that particular team, to see what their response is in reference to the 3 versus 4.
And it looks like we have another question from Katie, if you want to go ahead.
Hi, thank you so much for taking the time to do this. I just had 2 quick questions. I have a 2-year-old who is receiving speech and OT, and I'm curious if it's possible that when they do the assessment, if she could potentially not qualify for either one of those services and be exited in a sense before she even starts special education at the school district side when she's 3.
Yeah, it's always a possibility. That's why they have to assess. They do all of their assessments to determine whether your child will meet that eligibility criteria under IDEA and California Education Code. So it's not a guarantee that she will meet criteria, but that's why they do the comprehensive assessments to determine if she would meet that criteria. That's not saying that she wouldn't necessarily qualify under maybe a medical piece. I'm not sure of the situation, but they have to follow that education criteria. So you will only know if she meets criteria if they do those assessments and determine whether she meets the criteria under that education code or IDEA. So it's always a possibility, but you definitely wouldn't know until they do those assessments.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. And then my other question was her birthday is early August. So she'll be turning 3 in early August. And I know we can have the transition meeting between 27 and 33 months, but because she's an early August birthday, I wasn't sure if SLPs and OTs are working over the summer. So I didn't know if that pushed up our timeline slightly a bit more.
It depends on the district. Some districts like to have the IEP prior to summer break, but they are still held to that same timeline even during summer birthdays. It's different for the kids in the regional center moving into that from Part C, which is early start at Regional Center for Early Intervention Services, to the school district, which is Part B of IDEA. That's the one exception. They're still held to that timeline. And so they can't say, sorry, we were on summer break. They're still obligated, even during the summer I should have said that earlier. That's one exception for the Part C to Part B transition for our regional center kids moving into special education at 3. They're still obligated to hold that IEP meeting by the 3rd birthday. So whether the district will request to hold that IEP meeting in June, because maybe they don't have coverage at the beginning of August for whatever reason, districts will determine how they're going to schedule that. And it's different. Some districts have full teams during the summer months, and then some smaller districts may say, if any referral comes up or any IEP needs to happen or take place, then contact them. So we in our 10 county catchment area, we have 83 school districts, and they don't all do it the same. So but they are still legally obligated to hold that IEP by her 3rd birthday.
Okay,
So that would definitely be a question, moving into, once that transition planning conference is held. If they determine that she does need to be referred for special education testing at that TPC meeting, I would ask, because say I have concerns because she does turn 3 years old in August, and how does your district address those summer birthdays? Do you hold it in June, or do you have a full team throughout the summer months? Because either way, they're still obligated to have that IEP by the third birthday.
okay, perfect. Thank you so much.
Of course.
And then we have another one in the chat. Again, I'm not fast enough to respond to typing, so we'll go ahead and answer
I
it
missed
live.
it.
What can be done for a situation where the school of attendance will not be the right fit for my child, and as the parent, have a school in mind where they may attend due to medical needs? My child will need a school nurse with them as they have one at home now, and I'd like for them to attend a school outside our home school district that meets those needs. I was told that they first need to meet with the home school district to discuss this and make the request to the appropriate school. Is this true? So yes, but there's nuance. So if a student does have needs, so like we go through, we do our assessment, and we find that they have additional needs, such as needing a school nurse or needing a more restricted setting, the district will make an offer to a different school. So it may not be your home school, which is your residential school right next to your house. It may be another school. So the districts have what's called a continuum of services they can offer. So not every school site will have that entire continuum. Typically, the way we see it work is specific sites target specific portions of the special education continuum. So those will all be identified through assessment. The team will make the offer of a site that can support the needs of the student. And then nursing can be a related service on the IEP. So depending on what they need in terms of related services will depend on what that will look like on the IEP. In terms of providing a school outside of the district will not be able to do that piece. So if there is a specific school that is a public school in another district, your district of residence cannot place a student in another district.
Unless it's a non-public or like a county program.
And
then they refer.
Yeah, and those would only come after data. So if it's an initial assessment, we would need to essentially exhaust the continuum within the district first and have data to support the need for those more restrictive non-public schools for that particular student. In terms of wanting to go to another school in a different district, you always have the right to do an intra-district transfer. However, with that, it is up to the receiving district as to whether the child will be accepted. So they have to provide placement for the students within their district first, and based on what they have available, then they can look at adding additional students. So what we often see is your district that you are currently in will say, yes, we will help to initiate the transfer. And then the receiving district will say, no, we don't have the space. So it's a layered question for sure. There's a lot of nuance there, but you're always going to want to start with your district of residence. They will make their offer. We will need to collect data to see if a more restricted setting, like we were saying with least restrictive setting, we always want to see how close to gen ed we can get that is appropriate to the student. So that's kind of our starter there. And next one we have, what qualifies a child to have a para-educator? Are they difficult to get? Another nuanced.
Okay.
Yes
Well,
and no.
Yeah. Every service or program needs an assessment. So in order to determine whether a child qualifies for a paraeducator, they would need to do an assessment, and they would determine through observation, like a rubric, whether there's any safety concerns like elopement, are there behavioral concerns, health concerns, and then of course academics. So it wouldn't just, typically the academic are Also, there's difficulties in academic because of significant areas such as behavior, safety, or health. So they would follow the rubric and determine whether they would benefit from a paraeducator. I don't know if they're necessarily difficult to get, but they just need a lot of data to support providing that paraeducator. They do factor in that paraeducator is considered very restrictive because it can cause a lot of dependence on that paraeducator. And they have seen children not necessarily access their own teacher, but they rely on the paraeducator. So they're very careful about that dependence piece, and also to determine if, in order to remain in that educational environment, do they require an additional adult support in order for them to benefit from that program? So it's not that it's difficult, it's just they need data to support placing a paraeducator with a child.
And everything in and around an IEP is data driven. So we
Mhm.
always want data to support everything in the IEP. So we want data to support that they would need a paraeducator, data to support that they need speech, that they need OT, all of those different things. An IEP is data driven. So you'll hear data a lot, a lot.
Yeah,
Um,
everything.
Our next question, my daughter turns 3 in mid-December and we have not heard from the school district. Should we reach out to get the process started? We had a meet and greet in July, but we have not heard anything since.
Are they in early start, Matt?
Yes, she is.
Okay, so that transition would you can contact your service coordinator.
Okay.
Because she's still in early start. So your contact person would be the service coordinator, who then is in contact with that district. So because she's not 3 yet, she still falls under that Part C that I explained under IDEA, and that would be still under regional center. So
Okay, yeah,
I would
sorry,
definitely reach out to her service coordinator to see where. Have you had the transition planning conference meeting yet?
No, we haven't. All we had was a meet and greet during her annual IFSP meeting.
Okay. So I would definitely recommend reaching out to the service coordinator to see if that is coming up, or where you are in the process in terms of that transition from Part C to Part B.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Of course.
And then our last one, can the recording of this meeting be emailed? I believe so. We'll just have to talk to our training scheduler and then we can go. I believe so. We talked about it prior, but yes.
And
yes.
then part of it didn't start recording, I think, until the first slide. So it didn't include the introduction or the agenda, I believe. But thankfully, it started on that first slide. So just know that the agenda is not recorded. Is that correct, Tara? I think
Yes.
yeah.
Mhm.
So on that, it was started, the recording started on that first slide after the agenda. So all the information is still in there. It's just not the introduction or the agenda.
Our next one, are gentle transitions a thing, something I can request? Where can I present the first few times or beginning of class so my child doesn't feel lost, traumatized, being dropped off with strangers? There can definitely be a plan with the team. I would say like that is something always in the forefront, you know, when we're transitioning's hard. It's very difficult. So, that should be a discussion within the meeting. What will transitioning look like? What is the plan in place there? So like expressing those concerns in the IEP meeting that, you know, I have concerns that she may be lost, she may feel traumatized, very upset. We want to minimize that for her because we want school to be a positive, fun experience for the students going. So I would suggest discussing that with the IEP team so that way you can come together and collaborate to see how do we effectively transition student from being in the home environment to being in school.
Okay. And then we're going to have to end since we have our interpreters and ASL interpreter. Thank you so much for attending our first 2025-2026 academic school year community webinar. We will have our next one in December, and that will cover understanding special education, both the process and the IEP document. And that will be sent to your child service coordinator, as well as be advertised on our website and on social media. So thank you all for joining us, and we appreciate your participation, and have a good rest of your day. Thank you.